Hello, everyone, and welcome to Jump Up Supercast, the only podcast on the internet that can officially announce the pronunciation is Ness. Joining me today, Saf.
I'm so happy that the facts have become clear, and that the right way of saying it is Ness, unlike the heathen that's going to be announced next.
Also, Moozamil.
I came back after about a month, and this is how we're starting? Like, do you want me? Do you not want me on the podcast? Like, is that what it is?
Here's
like,
the thing.
You
might notice that I said and Moozamil, implying that he's the last one. Our dear friends, right after Moose got off the deserted island that he got stranded on the way home from New Hampshire, Brandon and Noah got stranded on another deserted island. So now they're gone.
What is it with New Hampshire and just
I don't New Hampshire. Like, look, it's easy to get. It's a small state.
It's an island nation.
It's very easy to get lost.
Like the Bermuda Triangle of America.
Oh,
but and I think New Hampshire kind of is like shaped like a triangle, kind of.
Follow the money. Oh man. Like, yeah. So, and with Brandon and Noah being gone, I know that Saf and I now outnumber the people who are anti-Ness. So this is the only week that I can do that intro.
No, you're pro-Ness.
Noah's also a Ness man. He's nasty.
Oh, he's a Ness man.
He's a
that beloved Jim Carrey film.
Okay, I feel like we should correct the record here, though. The only reason people are saying, "Oh, Nintendo converted," no, they just spelled it out in katakana, and so like
Ness.
It's not the same. That's not
official.
Confirming a pronunciation.
It is official.
No.
It's confirmed.
No. Reggie Fils-Aime. He says NES, and I believe my friend Reggie Fils-Aime.
Reggie sold pizzas for a living.
Yeah, he worked at Panda Express. He's a worldly man. He knows how to pronounce it.
No.
Yeah, he's a worldly man. Exactly. Yeah. So you're just proving my point.
No, he's a Ness man too. I know in my heart. Speaking of my friend Reggie, our friend Reggie, he's all of our friends. He's a friend of the children, Reggie, much like Godzilla.
Yeah.
You know what's my favorite clip that's resurfaced?
What?
Maybe I'll put it in the description. Just the one where it's like, but that's enough for me. I'm gonna go home and play Animal Crossing New Leaf on my Nintendo 3DS. And the tweets that's like when a girl tries to like grab your thigh when you're watching Netflix, and like it's very good. That's enough for me. So boys, we've had it. I mean, how many episodes are we on now? We're getting close to 30, right? Like we're approaching that.
We only missed one episode.
This is the first time that we've missed an episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we would think missed an episode. Surely there's news to talk about. And
turns out
this is the part you would think I would say no, but there actually is a little. There's some, which is more than what we've had in the past. There's something to talk about. This baby's got something to say. So, let's get into the big boy news, right? The news that might not even be news, but baby, I want to talk about it as though it is news.
Oh.
Which is a report about the next generation Xbox.
Ooh.
Now, you might remember in the past, we've mentioned, we were ahead of the curve on this, to be honest, right? Back earlier, we discussed a couple, like a month ago or so. Hey, Microsoft might be looking at two systems, right? Might be looking at launching with two different platforms. Even before that, we talked about how Microsoft is looking at streaming services, right? And streaming devices. Now, this headline, everyone's covering it. Baby, if you were listening to the Jump Up Supercast, you were getting those breadcrumbs. We were leading you down the path. But it all comes together, right? Where there is a report that Microsoft is looking, like they said, like we mentioned before, at launching two different SKUs for their next generation console at launch. The first of which will be a traditional gaming box, right? In the vein of the Xbox One, Xbox One X, right? A game, you put the disc in the system, you download the games. If you want to download the games, you play them. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? The other one, though, would be a significantly cheaper, so potentially around $200, streaming device where games are streamed to you from Microsoft, right? And of course, people have always said we've had streaming boxes before, right? And we've had services Sony famously bought Gaikai back towards the start of this system.
Yeah.
OnLive just got bought by Sony to get shut down. So there, there's been this stuff before, but it's always had a bit of latency. There's always been just a little bit of lag by the nature of the beast of the stuff. Microsoft believes they've gotten a way around it, which is that they are splitting the effort. So because they are charging more than like what an Amazon Fire Stick would be, there can be some computational stuff like the actual geometry, the actual, calculations would take place on your system, while the rest of the content of the game would be streamed to the box, right? And that the actual computational stuff is where they view a lot of the lag as coming from. So if they remove that part being streamed, they think they can lower the overall latency.
I mean, I don't know if Microsoft's like the rumor, because this is just like what people are hearing, right?
Yes.
And I feel like if they are hearing that, Microsoft thinks they found a solution, this is not something they're speaking to consumers. This is just within themselves.
Yeah.
If they feel like they figured it out, I kind of believe it. I have no reason not to.
I feel like we live in an era where we're past launching a product like that would be unplayable, right?
Yeah. And especially with how the Xbox One has gone, right?
Yeah.
I don't see Microsoft taking this huge risk not knowing it's going to 100% work at launch. Yes. You know what I mean? They are going to be extremely precautionary, when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because, Microsoft does not want another Xbox One on their hands, right? That system was a complete mess at launch, and I really think that they're going to put in all their effort to make sure, this shit works at launch,
Yeah. Also, this was the exact same product they actually started out with, or they tried to start it out with when they first announced the Xbox One.
Well, not really, because
I think it's down the path a little bit, right? I mean, it is this thing where, it's truly, I mean, the thing, and there's people have feelings about this, and I guess I'll ask you how you guys feel, right? One of the critiques is that with the streaming thing, you are truly just paying for a license, right? There's no longer any idea of digital ownership at all with a service like this, right? Does that present to you a thing that we're fine with it now, but then we'll look back on it years later and say, we shouldn't have given up that?
Here's the thing, right? Even a physical game, though, in this day and age, Spyro, for example, coming up, right?
Yes.
That game only has the first game on the disc. You have to download the second and third games, right? So it's more and more, it's that feeling of ownership or owning the game, that hasn't existed in a while,
Yeah.
And then in the age of patches and DLC and the product that's on the code that's on the disc is incomplete, you are not getting a complete experience regardless, and less as we go on, as we see, right? We're getting giant day one patches, so even on the first day that disc is outdated, so it's I don't know how much it matters anymore.
Also, I'm on the exact opposite page of Muzzy, but to back Muzzy's point up, even if you're subscribed to PSN or one of those online services, PSN in their terms and conditions, they highlight straight up that any purchase you make through PSN is still owned by Sony. And as soon as you're back out of PSN, you lose the ability to play those games. It's already been a happening since this has always been the case.
Yeah.
And this has always been my main concern, because I like owning my own games. I like being able to share my own games as well. That's why I tend to try and pick out physical copies of it. I feel it's convenient to me, because that sense of ownership and that sense of getting the ability to play whenever I want to, instead of having to rely on an internet service or even just actual license fee that I need to pay every month, is much preferable to me.
Yeah.
I like that sort of thing.
So I do think, though, we don't have to worry too much, right? Because this is just an option, right? This is a and they're from what it looks like this is a secondary box, the main thing is the big beefy console with the disc drive and everything, This is just an option for someone who can't afford a $500 console,
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I think honestly, people like us, we can buy the big awesome $500 console that's gonna play our thing in full 4K and 60 FPS and all that jazz, right? Meanwhile, other people have the option to stream those games, at a much lower. It's a much lower barrier to entry,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a good thing.
And
right?
I think it pairs well with Game Pass, right? That's another thing.
Oh, for
saying.
sure. Like, owning this system with Game Pass, like, you're set. Like that's a very affordable way to take part in this hobby, right? Because games are expensive.
and I think that there's something to be said to, because like Phil Spencer, I mentioned maybe this before on the podcast. He did a talk with Jeff Gerstmann at E3. It was interesting. It was insightful. He is very good at talking like a human being, which is pretty rare among the video game industry when you're doing interviews. But he talked about how part of the thing that they're looking at with stuff like streaming is not necessarily like, it is that expanding the player pool, right? Like he wasn't saying like blue ocean, but he was kind of getting there, right? Like the idea that like if you can get the streaming technology to the point where you can stream Xbox games to phones, you can stream Xbox games through a smaller, cheaper product, things that people may already own, the player pool expands in such a huge way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that even if this is not going to come out, right, which there's the potential that they look at it and they truly say, oh, this isn't working right now, the internet technology is not there yet, that's a limiting factor, and they just launch with the console, right? Which, like, I mean, even if they don't launch with this, they just launch with a console, that's going to be what Sony's going to do, like, it's not like suddenly they're missing out on a huge part of their strategy. I think they do want to be there first. I think they view this as a Wild West situation.
Yeah, they're trying to make the Xbox brand feel more accessible to the mainstream market.
I mean, it's because, like, before the PS3 360, consoles did used to get pretty cheap,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, PS4, Xbox One, PS3 360, they kind of stayed at $300 for a long time, maybe dipped to $250, but they don't really dip below that too much,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think a console, even if it is a streaming box, a console that lets you play all the newest games for only like $200, I think that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, I think like you said, I don't think you can overstate how much, like, the Wii's initial price point, like, helped the Wii. Like, I think once once you see a 2 instead of a 3 in front of a number, there is just a different way that viewers,
it makes a huge
that consumers view it.
I mean, like, and I do think that a market for consumers who are looking for getting into games, but at a budget is kind of underserved. Because, like, we've seen in NPD for the last year and a half, 3DS keeps going up year over year,
Yeah, and we'll get to that a little bit later on, but like you said, like, there is...
But just a quick note on that, though. It's like, there's a market for cheap hardware with cheap games, I mean, I think famously, an Xbox that's $200 and for $60 for $120 a year, I get Game Pass, which is like, what, $10 a month? Yeah, that's so $10 a month and a $200 console, like, I can play all the newest games. That's a pretty good value. You know.
And so I think it'll be interesting, right? Like, I'm sure that there will be questions along. It'll be a Switch situation, I think, right? Where, like, the Switch, when it was first shown off, there was a lot of doubt around it. There was like, does this even work? Like, putting it in the dock, like, there's going to be a weird process. It's not going to be a thing. The Joy-Con are going to be weird. And then
I forget about that.
Yeah, there was
I forget about, like, all the doubt that there was there, right?
Yeah,
like...
which is funny looking at now, because when the Switch came out, people, there was minor stuff like the left Joy-Con, but people were by and large like, oh, this works, right? But I think it's a thing that's very hard to demo, especially. A thing like this, right? Because, like, you're like, oh, we're streaming it on the show floor of a convention, and, like, one, that's an awful idea because conventions are famous for having just awful like internet because everyone's using it so much there, right? Like, so I don't know where exactly. And then, like, if you take press into like a room like at Microsoft, it's like, well, this doesn't mean anything for a guy that lives in the middle of Indiana that gets 5 megabits per second internet, like,
right? Yeah.
And so I think that they have a sell to do if this does come out.
They'll definitely have to rely a lot on, like, word of mouth and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But like I said, like, as long as we're getting a traditional console, I'm all for this.
No skin off my back. Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. But so that was the thing. Also, we'll get a little bit into every console maker actually today, which is nice. We had Sorry, Saf. We're going to talk a little bit about sales.
How could you do this?
They did their Nintendo and Sony did their Q1 financial reports this last week. I want to make note before we get into the actual numbers. I want to complain.
Oh.
Because I want to give credit. You know, maybe people say we have a Nintendo bias. Sure. Removed from all of that stuff. I want to say that I wish more companies would give us actual numbers like Nintendo does. Right?
Yes.
There is something that is truly so
with
nice.
Nintendo, if it hits 1 million in a fiscal year, we will know the exact number it sold, which is extremely nice. No one else does that, and I really wish more people would. Like, it's nice to have that like exact number for all of these games, you know?
Yes. And
I'm
it's
sure
good
all the
because
nerds in the world
and, you know,
are super excited for that.
Hey, they are. Well, I mean, but the thing is, right? Like the way that life works, the way that video games work, is that they're designed to sell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are sometimes games where you go and you look at it and you say, oh, like this is a passion thing, like Bayonetta 2, right, on Wii U. They knew that wasn't going to sell, right? Like you just walk out knowing it. But then, you know, there are games, but when those games don't sell, you start to worry, right? You're like, will they greenlight another? Will this continue? So, you know, if the games that you like sell well, that's only good because it means that there are probably going to be more of them, right? And so just to hit a couple of things, the sort of broad strokes, not to get too into the weeds, the Switch, hardware was down a little bit versus last year. Last year it was launched, so that was slightly to be expected. It was down like 5%. The big jump, though, software almost doubled, or I think it might have more than doubled in the same time frame. It is. I don't want to say flying off the shelves because a lot of the purchases are digital, but Switch software, besides Sushi Striker, God rest its soul, there's not been a big flop yet. And that's sort of the biggest takeaway, is that, like, you know, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the best-selling Xeno game ever, right? That includes Xenogears, Xenosaga, all of them, right? Like, Mario Tennis Aces won the month of June on the MPDs. Also, funny of note, the console that won the month for MPDs of June was the NES. So, for the first time since it was tracking it, the NES won because they restocked the NES Classic. Turns out, if they made more of them, people will buy them. But by and large, the Nintendo Switch is doing very well, right?
Yay!
And the question is, right? Because I want to touch on this. We talked about this relatively early on in the podcast. If you went onto the internet, if you went onto resetera.com, you would have thought that the first half of this year for Nintendo was a nightmare. It was truly the ultimate curse, right? Like, just ultimate drought, very bad, right? And then E3 had a lot of Smash and maybe not a lot of other things that people were looking for, and people got very upset. But then we look at these numbers and they say, oh, actually, that didn't matter in the wide market, right? And so,
yeah,
like, we've talked about it a little bit back then, but I want to touch on it again. The disconnect between games that the internet prioritizes versus games that sell well, right? Like the fifth best-selling Switch game is 1-2 Switch. It's at like 2.5 million units, right? Like, that's a game that is at 50 on Metacritic, you know? Like, but sort of, I guess my question is to you both. Do you think that there is just never a way for those things for the internet perception of games and for how the actual sales do you think that there's just too much of a divide of what is prioritized among those different types of spheres of people that play games for there to ever really like be a accurate sense of prediction from the wider hardcore gaming audience?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I feel like the Switch has been doing this since launch, right? Like, everyone thought, myself included, to be honest, after that January presentation, people were not too happy with the prospects of the Switch, right? On like more hardcore gaming sites, right? And then it turns out to be an extremely successful launch, right? And that's been the story time and time again. Like a game like Kirby, which was kind of ho-hum, to be honest. You know, it was just kind of there.
Very
like,
basic Kirby, right?
Yeah, very basic Kirby game, which is saying a lot for a Kirby game, you know.
Yeah,
already
very known for being basic, yeah.
And that Kirby game is the fastest selling Kirby has done in a long time, you know? And what's crazy is, like, I think, so the story of the Switch, I think more than anything is just how well the software has been selling, right? And you mentioned how we're more than double from last year. That's not even counting the digital-only games. The games that are only available on the eShop, right? Which we know are, like, Hollow Knight sold extremely well, right? And like, it's like every week we read a news story about how X indie game sells the best it ever has on Switch. It's outsold every other platform version combined, you know?
Yeah.
Like, we see that story so often, and I don't know, like, it's crazy how the Switch, it's just... People want to buy games on that thing.
It's a funny thing because I think it's a conversation that should be had more on the internet, which is that hardware sales are important, right? Like that's true of every system, but it's hardware sales are important because they are a delivery system for software sales, right? Like that is where companies make their money, because a lot of times when you're buying a system, if they're making money off a system sold, it's pretty negligible, right? Like except for the Wii, where they made a noted profit off every Wii sold. That's not the case. I don't even think it's the case for the Switch, right? Like,
the Switch at least at launch was like barely eking out. Like they were selling it for a profit, but it was.
But it was a small profit, right? Like their money was coming from software, and so people, of course, after Nintendo did the projections for 20 million in this year and 100 million software sold a couple months ago, people would always, now that's the constant conversation topic. It's like, will it hit 20 million, right? Like it's not going to hit 20 million with Go Vacation, stuff like that. But I think that even if it doesn't hit that 20 million, if it exceeds the software sales, that's even better for them, right? Which
is looking like it will, right? Like they sold 18 million units of software in the slowest quarter of the year, and you have Smash and Pokemon launching at the end of the year. Like they're going to blow past that 100 million goal. Right?
There's a lot coming.
It's just insane to see. It really is, right? Like, just the way the software is selling on the system. And I think, because the perception has been, this has been a weak year for Switch, right? Yeah. In terms of new software.
And there's some validity to that, especially in the early.
And I think, I think there is, absolutely. But I think what we don't realize is, people did not own a Wii U, Like, that's the fact, right? So, like, a game like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze selling 1.5 million copies, it does it because that's an exciting game on a system now that people actually care about,
This is my beef with, like, kind of using gamers as a main perspective of, like, deciding whether or not this particular product would be good or not. Because gamers aren't fucking businessmen. They aren't. They aren't fucking market analysts. As much as they try to PR people, they're nothing. Yeah. They're just gamers, and they just like playing video games.
I mean, we're not.
Yeah, no, we're not.
We're experts.
No, we're experts. We're masters.
That's exactly why I just don't give a fuck about sales, because there's no way I'll have a better understanding from on sales than there would be from like a fucking expert, because none of us knows what the fuck is going to happen with the system. We can make guesses and we can make educated assumptions about this sort of thing.
To be fair, the experts are also making guesses,
but
right?
They have more knowledge in the field, and they would be more accurate, I hope,
I'm just saying,
than the fucking average.
There are some insiders on Reset Era that I've been right with. There are some that I like. I'm just saying. But I mean, I get you, right? Like the problem is that like, we're both extreme. We're all enthusiasts, right? We put a lot of time in. Saf, I saw your playtime on the Switch for Octopath. We're putting a lot of time in, but that doesn't, putting time in doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at knowing the wider market, right? In some ways, it makes you worse because you are so hyper focused on the things that you know that you are into, right? Yes. And so it is just a problem, and I don't know if there's a big fix for it, but I think it's just a thing that everyone should remember, because, I know at least 3 of us spend times on internet web forums where video games are discussed. Just as good to remember that everyone on those websites are dumb and idiots. Yeah. They're all morons, and we hate them all. Yeah.
Just to be clear, we're calling you out, Reset Era.
Yeah, every last one of you. Except for the mods and admins. We like you, so please don't ban me.
Ignore that I post there every day.
I don't post there at all.
Please make moves,
guys. Oh, shit. I just lost the chat.
And then I guess want to throw another one onto the pile of just good news for video game sales. Sony is up their projections for the PlayStation 4 this year. They are 82.2 million. If they hit their projections, they will be very close to passing the Wii, and soon after passing the PlayStation 1, putting it as the second best-selling console of all time behind the PlayStation 2, and third overall behind the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo DS.
I think
so.
Sorry, do you think?
Sorry, go ahead.
There's like the special thing about PS2. That's why I always thought what made the PS2 sell the best was the DVD feature. Like you could because that was the cheapest form of DVD players you can get just with the PS2.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like that's the thing about like you were saying with the PlayStation 2 is that, and even with the Xbox 360, with these consoles that were leaders in their generation, they always had an extenuating other entertainment thing to help them along the way. The PS2 had the DVD player. Xbox 360 had Netflix and streaming things to help it out. The PlayStation 4 really hasn't had that. Like, it is a set-top box, but there are much cheaper ones on the market. So I think that it is exciting for overall gaming that really a console with not a lot of outside gimmicks is still selling well on just the merit of video games. I think that's good, and I think it was worth making note of. Of course, we'll see how the legs are. I don't think it'll get close to PlayStation 2 because I don't know if anything ever will. But, certainly they're not mad at being at getting over 100 million in their lifetime. But that is sort of the sales portion of it. We want to, thank you, staff, for being patient. Now, this is a thing that's just sort of a general topic, just sort of a general conversation I want to have, because I was looking on the internet and I saw this at E3. I saw part of this collaboration, but Monster Hunter and Final Fantasy, right? At E3 it was announced during Square Enix's press conference, one of the only real announcements of Square Enix's conference, that you could fight a Rathalos in Final Fantasy 14. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I don't play Final Fantasy 14, but like, that's cool. Also, but just got added this week, baby, Behemoth from Final Fantasy is now one of the hunts in Monster Hunter.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I watched it, and like a Moogle shows up and is like, "Uh-oh, there's this thing from my world. You gotta help us out." And like there are crystals on the map now, like in Final Fantasy. When you win, it goes da 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 da. It's great.
That's really cool.
It's great. I love it. Right?
Concerning that they've like the crossovers between Final Fantasy 14 and Monster Hunter instead of Final Fantasy 15.
No, I mean 14 is an ongoing game, and it's I think. Especially for this specific kind of crossover, it makes more sense to be put into an MMO.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, Monster Hunter World is kind of supposed to be a living game too, right? Where there's updates.
Yeah.
And so I think it pairs well. But it got me thinking about just like the effectiveness of a crossover, right? Or just an appearance of a guest, in video games. And so I was sort of wanting to think about just like some that are of note throughout the course of gaming history and why they do matter and when they don't, right? Because there's a lot of times where there are crossovers and you're like, did this sell anyone on this game? Did anyone actually like care about this, So I just want to sort of go down some and just like mention why do you think they worked or they didn't work, right? So the first one, potentially one of the greatest, to be honest with you, Soul Calibur 2, right? Yes. And this one's a little microcosm because I think it has both incredibly effective and not effective at all guest characters, because and Soul Calibur has a history of this, right? They have guest characters in almost every game. But Soul Calibur 2 was the one where there was the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube version. Pop quiz, can either of you remember the guest characters for all three?
It was Link, obviously.
Yeah.
Link is the obvious one. That's the one that carried it to be the best-selling version of that game on the worst-selling platform.
Yeah, which is, that says a lot, right?
Yeah.
The Xbox, wasn't it like Spawn or something? Was that the name?
It was Spawn. The Todd McFarlane comic book character.
And then I want to say the PS2 version had Heihachi.
Yeah.
It did. Heihachi from Tekken,
he doesn't even have a sword.
He doesn't even have a weapon in the weapon fighter,
but
right?
Like, here's the thing, right? With the PS2 version, things could have been very different because, like, we recently found out that they actually were inking a deal to put Cloud in the PS2 version. So, like,
which would have been
that would have been insane. But apparently, Square backed out last minute, which is why the PS2 version just has another Namco character because it's like, okay, we don't have time. We need a character that we
don't have time to license.
We don't have time to negotiate licenses.
When we already
like,
own.
We just gotta put someone in here.
But to me, Spawn's even weirder.
Oh.
Because Spawn is, like, from our reality. He's from, like, modern day. He's this weird superhero. Like, the work they did to justify him was very funny.
Why Spawn?
Like, Spawn is a comic
book character.
Yeah, he's very edgelord. He's very, like, look at all the blood and gore. I'm gonna swear a lot.
I'm gonna swear a lot.
And
I saw that chance.
Yeah.
Nice.
But, like, I think the thing was that, like, Heihachi was not... I mean, Tekken was on PlayStation, right? But, like, it wasn't like when you think of iconic PlayStation characters. Cloud's one of them. Heihachi's not, right? Like, iconic Xbox characters, there weren't any at that point, you know? Like, it was just Master Chief. And then, you know, but then Link... Baby, that's Nintendo. You put him on the box art. You say Link does not appear in a lot of other things too, right? Like he doesn't shop around.
Not
you know?
At all. In fact, like
and
even after that, like I can't think of too many instances. It's funny because like I got the Zelda encyclopedia that came out recently, and near the end of the book, there's like a section of like Link's other appearances, right? And like it's not much, you know. It's like Soul Calibur 2 and like Sonic Lost World.
Yeah, I was going to mention Sonic Lost World. That was, if you want to see how desperate Nintendo was in the Wii U era, they're like, take Link, Sonic, we don't care. It's not even a good Sonic game, just take him. They also gave him Yoshi, too.
That's right, I forgot about that. Yoshi's in that game, too. What a weird thing, like, I don't understand.
Wait, Link's entire appearance was just his world, well, just things.
It was just Hyrule.
Yeah.
Right, it was,
Well, no, but he shows up. You see him flying around on the loft.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. I know Sonic dresses up as Link in that level, right?
Yeah.
I was so confused there for a second because I had no idea that was the suggestion. Because like, when you said Sonic Lost World, I was like, well, then any kind of costume for Link would count as a crossover. Like you're going to be including Monster Hunter, or at least.
Yeah, Monster Hunter was one of the... It's just like, Link doesn't really venture outside of The Legend of Zelda very often.
Yeah. I mean, and like, it's funny you mentioned Cloud in Soul Calibur 2, because another weird one where, like, this should have made an impact to what was happened was, you remember Urgies on the PlayStation 1?
No.
Somewhat.
Urgies God Bless the Ring was a 3D fighting game made by Squaresoft. Right. And it had... Yes, and it had...
I don't remember that game.
All of them. It had, like, the whole party from Final Fantasy VII. It was Cloud, Tifa, Sephiroth, Vincent, Yuffie, Red 13, and Zack. Like, it was the only other place you could play as those characters for an extremely long time.
Get more attention. Like, holy shit.
It was a 3D fighter. It's very weird to go back and look at. And you're like, how did this not work?
Wait, was
right?
it like a very sluggish?
I don't know.
Because I think it sounds like...
It probably was, yeah. It was.
It was not good. It did not review well was, I think, the biggest problem, right? Like, but it was... I mean, I think fighting games are, like, the primo territory for all of this, you know? Like, it's just the place where, like, you know, Mortal Kombat has every single movie monster, Freddy and Jason and Alien and Predator. There's all there hanging out. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Like...
I mean, it's the easiest to make sense of it in a fighting game, right? Like, it's just, like you don't have to... You don't have to work too much to justify it, you know?
Yeah. Versus, like, they had to work very hard at Sonic.
To Soul Calibur as well. The weirdest crossover for Soul Calibur. Didn't they have, like, a Star Wars one with, like, Darth Vader and Yoda?
Yeah, that's Soul Calibur 4.
Yes, that was 4. Yeah, it had Yoda, Darth Vader,
and
then Star Killer.
What?
From the Force Unleashed.
That has to be the weirdest.
That was, if you remember, a couple episodes ago. Brandon's Star Wars game. That was the piece of trivia about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, like, Kingdom Hearts.
Oh.
Like, we don't think about Kingdom Hearts as a crossover now, but it's an insane crossover.
Yeah, you don't think about it much anymore, but it is. You think it's how did Disney ever approve this? First of all, yeah, because Disney is like.
Mickey Mouse wearing the black cloak? Like, how did they allow that?
Disney's famous for being, like, very particular with how you use their characters, right? So, like, the entire existence of Kingdom Hearts is just baffling. You know? Like, like, how did... Who signed off on this?
I mean, I think the thing is, like, when you're looking at, like, there is value to the weirdo, right? There's value to the crossover that you go, what?
For sure.
Like, I mean, like, I think the character that got the most reaction from Mortal Kombat 11 was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because they're the weirdest ones, right? Like, there's just something like seeing Mario dunk in the NBA Street.
Oh, that one was super weird.
That's something. Yeah, that was super weird, right? And like, I mean, we are in a chat named after a crossover event, right? It's Super Smash Brothers. It's like, besides Kingdom Hearts, one of the most successful versions of this in all of video games. You know, like, and I think that like it's both like Rob, right? Like Rob got revived because he showed up in Mario Kart DS and Smash Bros. Like that's the only reason that any kids today know who that robot is. You know?
You ever
and I think
sit
that
back
like
and think about though just how insane the roster of Smash is? You know, like
it's
crazy. Insane. You know, even removing the third party characters, right? Having a game with Mario, Link, and Pikachu and a whole bunch of others, you know, and then you add like goddamn Cloud Strife, right, and Solid Snake and Ryu. It's like, what is this game?
Like I don't even know how, because it's funny because like famously in like Super Mario Maker you have all the amiibo costumes. With the Pokemon they didn't allow them to make the noises. Like Pikachu, if you press the up button, wouldn't do it. I rewatched that Smash Brothers ad, the original 64 one. Pikachu is getting slung across the screen by his tail by Yoshi. You're like, Game Freak would not allow this today, right?
The Pokemon
like
company, no way in hell would allow a commercial like that ever again. You know, like
yeah. And so I think that there is just something that is fun about like I think like the two things you got to do is you got to have at least one character that you're like, whoa, that is weird, right? What a weirdo. And then you also have, but it has to like, you have to put effort in, right? You can't just like throw a character in because then I don't think it works, right? Like you have to like try to be loyal to it. I think that's the thing that Smash does the best of any.
Yeah.
Right? Is that like just this loyalty to the original things that they're coming from.
I mean,
and trying to make them represent the best way they can.
I think a good example. Sorry, I'm sure you had a list prepared, and we're just kind of going all over the place now.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Mario and Rabbids. That was kind of wild, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we all hated it. We all thought this will be awful. And then we looked and we said, no, like, Davide Soliani cried, and then we saw the game and we said, they cared. They cared about this.
That's the thing, right? Like, you could see the passion behind it. You know, like, you could see that team at Ubisoft, they love Mario, you know? Like, you could see it.
They were excited to make a game with Mario in it.
No.
Right? Where, like, I think that if you look at, like, the weird thing is that, like, an example where I don't think it worked was, like, Link in Mario Kart, right? Like, Link in Mario Kart was cool, but, like, especially his original iteration was, like, in Hyrule Circuit, I complain about this a lot. It's, like, it's the most basic iteration of Link in Hyrule, right? Like, it is the most, like, just generic, non-specific version. And so, like, you would think, if you told me when I was 12, you can play as Link in Mario Kart, I would pick him every single time. And then I didn't. Like, I was stuck with Wario and, like, Dry Bowser. I was like, why is it all the characters I pick up?
Link with the...
But Breath of the Wild Link, they got his actual vehicle that makes sense for him, right? They incorporated things from the game. Like, he looks like he does in the game. I care way more about playing as Link now. I think that's a clear just version of that, right? Like, if you look at the Everybody's Golf series, it has a smack ton of PlayStation characters in it, you know? Like, just an insane amount. I don't remember any of them. I remember that Kratos was in it because, like, Kratos golfing is weird, but, like, it's a skin. There's nothing that's particularly Kratos about playing as Kratos in golf, you know? And I think that's the divide, right? Whereas if you're playing as, you know, even a character like Captain Falcon in Smash, even though he does nothing from his original game besides his final Smash, he makes an impact because they still put care into making him feel unique. And that's cool. So I mean, that was just sort of like seeing the Monster Hunter Final Fantasy stuff got me thinking about that. And I think it's always a treat, right? Like, I think E3 is the place where we get this stuff now. You know, like, we get Mario & Rabbids, we get that Final Fantasy stuff, we get Star Fox and Starlink. And that's, you know, I think that it gets people excited. I think that we live in an era of, like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know, where, like, people showing up in other things is what people love. And so I think that doing it right can do a lot for you.
When do we get Metroid Cross Star Fox?
Believe. So the Samus's ship will be playable in Star
All
Fox
Gale
Grand Prix.
Network
Mark
will
it
be
down.
redeemed.
Yeah. All the wait will be worth it. You will weep. But yeah, so I mean that's sort of the news. That was a fun little topic to reminisce on, to talk about a little bit. But that is, we have a low number, right? And the list is important because it is canon. We want to make sure that we aren't making huge rash decisions on the list, putting anything at number 1 without 40% of the Jump Up Supercast. So we're not going to do
I was so
the
ready
list
to put a
week.
game that Brandon and Noah just.
Okay, this is I've decided
I'm kidding.
change. This is the re-ranking
This
episode.
is the re-ranking.
This is the re-ranking episode. We're doing it right now.
This is the official re-ranking episode. You know.
First up, Metroid Other M is going below. We would not do that to those boys. We might. We'll see. Depends if they piss us off. But right now they're in our good graces, and we hope to get off the desert island soon. So that will make the podcast for this week. I want to thank you all for listening. Before we go, just want to hit some quick plugs. We have been dead on the Twitch channel for a little bit because Brandon and Noah have been dead. They'll be back soon, so keep an eye out on twitch.tv/jumpupsupercast. Keep an eye on our twitter.com/jumpupsupercast. We upload when we do the podcast, we tweet about it. When we stream, we tweet about it. The things that we do, we tweet about. And you can know that we are doing the things when you see us tweet about it. And so that is the big stuff to hit. We want to thank you all for listening, taking part, and just generally being jolly people. And I guess, it's been a while. Muzamil, we're glad to have you back, and so I want to give you the last
That's
word.
That's never a good idea.
Any particular thoughts? I appreciate it while you got it, because depending on how this goes, we'll see how the future takes us.
That makes sense. Yeah, I understand. Well, my final word is, I've been gone for a while. And I have an obligation, actually. I have an obligation to stream Bubsy. Not Bubsy. Croc. They're all the same to me. They're
Croc?
all...
Oh yes, I guess we should mention we never recorded the post for this. I won the E3 bets and Kevin won the E3 bets against
I
Moose.
lost. So I have an obligation.
Yes.
And so one day, it may not be soon, but fret not. One day, I will stream Croc and I will stream The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. It is coming. Please look forward to it, because I sure as hell am not. But other than that, I miss this podcast. It's a lovely, lovely thing. So try not to miss anymore. Bye.
Bye.